What's up, everybody? My name is Josh Ramos. I am the executive producer of Wolfcry Productions, and today I'm just going to be showing you my editing workflow for photography. So I decided to choose three different pictures. One that's a female portrait, who is my beautiful girlfriend Lindsay. Another one is one of my best friends, Taylor, and his dog Kona. And then there's a third one of Lindsay as well. And that's just a behind the back kind of shot, just because I do something a little bit different in that one, since it wasn't really a portrait. And yeah, so we're just gonna dive right into it. So the first thing that I do is I open everything up in Lightroom. And Lightroom, for some reason, has this weird preset where it has the sharpness up a little bit. I bring the sharpness all the way down, so I'm starting from scratch basically. And then I adjust the lens correction. But then I go to the transform where it'll adjust. I usually hit auto, and if it does a good job, it will just make the image look correct. And sometimes it works great, other times it doesn't work at all. If it doesn't work, but I do see that it does need to be adjusted, I'll just manually adjust it. And if I have to crop anything, so for Taylor's picture, I had to crop a lot, I do the cropping first as well. Because if you edit everything and then you start doing the crop, you might not like how the edit kind of looks. So do all that first, get the image how you want it raw, and then you just go in and I start making my corrections. So the style that I was going for these images was kind of like the minimalist look with high clarity, but like mono colors, except with like a little twist, because I feel like everybody's kind of doing that now. So I do things a little bit differently, and I don't know, maybe it'll help you guys find something out too. So what I do is boost up the shadows, bring down the highlights, the whites, bring up the contrast. And to get that minimalist kind of vibe, I will boost the vibrance, but then turn down the saturation. That's how I do it. There are many different ways that people do this, and a lot of them actually use that HSL color, and they manipulate each color on their own. I only use that HSL thing as a correction. So if one color is just more vibrant than the other, so for Canons, I know reds and magentas scream like in the camera as vibrant, so I would probably turn down the reds and magentas and stuff like that, blues in this case with some of these photos. And the new color wheel, or the color grading wheels, that's a huge feature, like a new feature that Lightroom came out with. I believe it was last year, and I love it. At first I was like, why would I ever use this? And then I saw how well it manipulates the image to give you a nice balance of colors. I use it all the time now. And then yeah, so now I'll play with the sharpen, and I usually look at the eyes. The eyes are the most important part of the image. So with Lindsay's, I put the sharpness on her eyes, make sure that the eye looked great, everything else around her looked good. Yeah, so high shadows, and then yeah, boost the contrast a little bit after adding some clarity. And then the texture I added a little bit of, which is kind of new. I don't think I really added clarity and texture to my images. I just feel like all the pictures that I see now, they all have a pretty strong clarity to them. So yeah, I started adding those. And then once you feel like you have all the colors and everything right, pop that into Photoshop. So one of the first things I do when I pop it into Photoshop, I have another plugin that's mainly used for portrait photography. It's actually its own software, but you can use it as a plugin in Photoshop, and that is the Portrait Pro. I use that just because it gives me a much smoother finish and a realistic finish when it comes to doing touch-ups on people's faces. I can't ever get it perfect in Photoshop, so I just ended up buying the software. I'll leave a link for it down below. I forget how much it cost, but it's a time saver. It's awesome. If you can't afford it, there are easy ways to do it in Photoshop. It's more time consuming, and again, trying to make it look perfect is sometimes a little difficult. Yeah, I know Photoshop is coming out with these like neutral filters or whatever they're calling it. To me, it's not fully there just yet, and for this image it might be okay. I just felt like it was a little too much softness and everything, but I have done it with other pictures, and weird distortion stuff starts happening around the images. So I'm gonna wait for it to be perfected, and then I will probably start using that instead. Like I said, the eyes to me are everything, so I'm just gonna make sure that all the eyes are great and good to go. I separate the subject and the background. So to do that, you go to select object. I do have a key shortcut for that, for my own kind of thing, just to make it easier. Yeah, if you haven't made your own little shortcuts and hotkeys or whatever you guys want to call them, do it. It saves you so much time. Literally, I do like the same, just command, boom, 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 done. Yeah, so you can see I have it as command O. It'll do that. And then I go into the masking tool so you can see what is and what isn't selected. And then I just go in and basically color out anything I don't want selected, and then color in everything that I do. After you do that, you go to select, modify, and smoothen it out like about 5 pixels or so, just because sometimes there are hard edges kind of going around the subjects if it's not perfect. And when you start manipulating the background, they stand out, is what I'm trying to say. So just make sure that you are aware of that, smoothen it out, and yeah. And then from there, you hit Command J when you have your subject selected. Hit Command J, and that's going to separate the subject and the background, but you still have the subject in case you'd have to refer back to it. And then what I like to do is get rid of anything that I don't like in the image, such as telephone pole wires and stuff like that. Any branches that are kind of too in the way or in focus. In this picture, there is a chain on the bottom of the chair or the bench, so I got rid of that chain. And then what I like to do is I make the background kind of how I want it, and then I start working on the subject, and then I'll bounce back just to see if I like how something looks in the background, but it does make it look more fake, then I'll add it into the subject as well, stuff like that. So the first thing I always do is I manipulate the brightness and contrast of the background. Always use adjustment layers. Don't do it directly on, because it's gonna bite you in the butt someday. Luckily for me, that hasn't really happened yet, but it will if I didn't do my adjustment layers. So I use the adjustment layer, do the brightness and contrast, and then I add a little bit of a sun ray to some of the stuff. To do that, I just use the lasso tool, and I just start selecting around the subject or just kind of where I want the sun ray. Sometimes I do like a big harsh light, and other times I just do like little, I don't know, like actual rays, which you will see in the second image. Make sure that you hit that little square. This little square is basically just to create the clipping mask. So anything that you are doing, you're only doing it to the subject. You're not doing it to the whole image. And from there, I like to adjust the brightness and contrast of the subject. I don't like the subject to look too harsh, so I like to throw down the contrast a little bit. And then I like levels just to darken the blacks a little bit to make sure that the blacks are actually black. I like having a little bit more texture, so I'm gonna actually take away some of the brightness from this ray. And that way now it has just a more natural looking type of sun ray. And that's why I had the subject separate, because otherwise she would be way too dark. And having them separated kind of helps it out a little bit. So I felt like there was a little bit too much red or magenta in Lindsay's skin tone. So I'm using the color balance to try to get rid of that. And as you can see, just 3 little notches of green made it kind of where I wanted it. You don't want frizzy hair, okay? So what you want to do is in the layer of the background, you're going to use the stamp tool, and you're going to just go around your subject's hair. If that doesn't get rid of it, depending on how well the object select worked, you're going to go into the subject one, and you're just going to erase around the subject's hair wherever there is like frizziness or just static hair, and that's going to make it look better. So once you get the image kind of how you like it, as far as the balance and the colors and the tone, save it, and it will automatically go right back into Lightroom. So there is a little bit of color peaking. This is when I start really using the S-curve. I'll sometimes use it at first, but I kind of like using it afterwards when I'm finalizing the image, just because if I don't actually need to crush the blacks or the highlights, then I'm not going to. And then now my favorite part, the vignette, because that kind of creates the tone of the whole image. So after putting on the vignette, I saw that it was a little bit too dark, so I'm gonna put a little bit more shadows in. And then lastly, I do have some presets that I purchased from the past, and I want the sky to be yellow. There's different ways to do it. I just know that there's one preset that I have, and I just went in and made the sky more yellow just to give it more of a sunset fall vibe, even though the picture that I'm taking of Lindsay and the picture I'm taking of Taylor are like a week and a half apart. And that's upstate New York for you. Here is the before and after of the first image of Lindsay. Now for the second picture, I'm going to show you guys a couple different techniques. Basically, everything I do in Lightroom is the same. It's just making sure that the balance of all the lighting and everything is correct. I hopped into Lightroom where I did a lot of the same stuff. I got rid of things that I didn't want in the background and in the foreground. Selected out my subject, and then did the masking, the brightness contrast, did some sun rays. This time I added the sun ray onto Lindsay just because obviously if the sun's hitting her, the top of it would be brighter and the back of it, like as it goes down, it gets darker. But the way that I was editing it, it wasn't going to do that naturally, I guess you can say. So I went in and did it myself. And this is what I mean by my rays. So I do a lot of little skinny rectangles, and I'll do the sun rays there, and then I will duplicate that, change the angle just a little bit, expand the mask, and then I actually turn down the brightness, and that's going to give you a more realistic type of sun ray again. So this is, I feel like there's an easier way to do this. This is just how I do it, but I'm going to add a glow going around the edges of Lindsay, because you can add a glow or a drop shadow behind her, but again, if the sun was hitting her naturally, it would be rolling over onto her, and there's no other way for me to know that or get this that I've discovered yet. I'm sure there are easier ways, but I make a new fill, and then I try to find like a good color that would look natural, and then basically I just erase all around her and on the inside and keep the edges kind of where I want them, and then change the opacity to make it look more natural. You just have a nice little glow going around her. It's weird when like you see it all happening, because then you're just like, oh my god, that looks so fake. But when you just see the image for the first time with all these edits, you don't notice it, which is also a hard thing. That's why usually when I edit, I'll edit the pictures for one day, and then the next morning or the next day or whatever, I look back at the images to make sure I'm still happy with how they look. Because a lot of times I'll start noticing, oh yeah, I had a way too, warm as a temperature, cold, that kind of stuff. Yeah, now since that's done, you bring it back into Lightroom. And again, I just make further adjustments. Make the sky yellow again, add the vignette, and I am good to go there. And now we're getting into Taylor's, which is a whole different vibe. It's a winter day, even though it was a week and a half apart. It's the dog Kona. So this is the first one that I'm cropping, like a full-on crop. So I'm going to go to the crop tool and just start cropping it out. And it's kind of weird how the style is today, where there's a lot of headroom. For photography, headroom is actually pretty cool, and I don't know why. I think it depends obviously on your scenery, but yeah, having headroom is nice. Yeah, see, having them perfectly center frame just feels weird now. Everything else is basically the same. Highlights, whites, everything goes down. I use the color grading, and then brought it into Photoshop. And then the first thing that I did when I brought it into Photoshop was just get rid of any of the natural snowflakes that were over Taylor and Kona's faces, or just any of the snowflakes that kind of look like a sty to me, if that makes sense, just something that you don't really want to look at. So I went in, got rid of all of those, and then I actually added more snowflakes with a brush that I had. add motion blur to the snowflakes just so that it looks like it's still falling and it's not hard in there. Selected him out again, did more of those sun rays. And the hardest thing about this was, even though I did no editing to Kona specifically, like even before I separated the subject and the background, Kona just looked fake for some reason. I don't know why she did. Basically what I was trying to do is try to make them look more natural. So I duplicated the subjects, flipped it vertically, and then made it black and a blur to them to kind of give it a shadow look. And then I just crushed the opacity like crazy. And I didn't like the leash. The dog was on a leash the entire shoot, but I just felt like it would be cool to make the dog look like she's very, very well behaved. And she was. It's a puppy. She was excited. So it was kind of hard to keep her focused on some things. Yeah, so I went in, got rid of the leash, and then that's when I actually did the touch-ups on the dog. Yeah, so got rid of the leash, added some desaturated the dog, added more contrast, and then I still didn't feel like it was perfect, so I actually just ended up darkening the whole ground a little bit, and that made it look more balanced, and the dog looked a little bit more natural. Brought it back into Lightroom where I did more adjustments, obviously with the vignette and everything like that, added the contrast back in and everything, and just perfected the images. And then here's the before and after of Taylor and Kona. Yeah, that is basically it. That's my editing workflow. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you found something helpful out of it. I knew, like, when I started doing this, I didn't know how everybody was doing what they were doing. So if you are a fan of my images, and if you are, I appreciate you. Just wanted to show you how I did it, so that way you guys have somewhere to kind of go or just look at. Every image is obviously going to be different, but just so you have an idea, and maybe my way works for you, maybe it doesn't, that's fine. So that is it for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like down below and comment if you have any questions. I'll make sure to answer them. Next week's video, it's actually going to be how to shoot with an animal, just because I felt like the shoot I did with Kona was a really good example of that. So I'm just going to show you one little trick. It's going to be a short video, so I'm going to show you a trick about what to do if you are shooting animals. And this also works if you're shooting with the kids, because kids are really hard to shoot pictures with. So stay tuned for that, guys. Bye.